Please keep in mind that no views expressed by this video are held by FDA or its volunteers. Rather, are intended to give students a holistic understanding of common arguments pertaining to this topic. Hello, everybody. My name is Srika Patnagar, and today we'll be discussing the topic, museums being free does more harm than good. So getting right into the table of contents in this presentation, first, we will be defining the resolution and providing background information on it. Then we'll be discussing potential arguments for first the proposition side of the debate and then the opposition side. So let's get right into our definitions and background. This is going to be the core of the debate and is what everybody else is going to base their arguments on. After all, if you don't know what a museum is, you can't debate about it. So before we get into our point, we first want to define a definition, and we want to provide some background information or some examples of museums in the world. Even if you already know what a museum is, you want to define it for everybody in the round to clarify its definition in case somebody doesn't know it. So we define museums as any building in which something of historical, artistic, or scientific value is displayed to the public to see. Some famous ones include the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., the Louvre in Paris, France, the British Museum in London, England, and the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, USA. So now that we've discussed the definition of a museum and some examples of museums, let's go right into the proposition side of this debate, which is going to be saying that museums being free does more harm. So jumping right in, our first proposition point is economic harm. Currently, most museums have admission fees or costs for visitors. This means that if I want to visit a museum, I'll have to pay the admission fee set by it. However, if museums become free, they're not able to charge these visitors these admission fees, meaning they lose all the money that they would get from these normally paying customers. This is a problem because the money used from admission costs are used by museums in many ways. Two examples include wages, or the money that is paid to workers at the museum, and gathering items that are on display. Both of these resources depend on money, as you need to pay workers for the work that they do, and getting items for the museum often requires renting or buying the item from any historic, artistic, or scientific organization. Since both of these resources depend on money, which is lost when we make museums free, the museums do not get enough money from admission costs, and they not making sure they aren't able to provide the same services that were otherwise provided to the public. Essentially, by making museums free, the museums themselves lose money, which only hurts customers. Now, here are two questions to get you thinking more about how museums use their admission costs. Your first question is, what is one more resource that depends on admission costs? And second, what would happen if museums cannot afford it anymore? I would suggest everybody to pause the video for a minute or two and think of answers to these questions. Okay, let's get started on discussing it. For the first question, another thing that depends on admission costs is the extensive research and planning behind gathering many of the items you see at display in the museum. After all, every item has its own unique story and information about it, and museums are required to research that information in order to provide the best experience possible for consumers. So if we lose research and planning, there will be less items and exhibits available at museums, which means less learning for students and less enjoyment for customers. The second contention that we're going to talk about is the economy. As we have already established, museums rely on the money they generate from their admission fees. When this money is taken away, they'll be forced to get their funding from somewhere else, as they do not want to lose the services that depend on admission costs. After all, you don't want to see your favorite museum losing every single exhibit it has because it's not able to get any money. As a result, the government will step in and raise taxes in order to fund these museums. Why does this happen, you may be wondering? The government has taxes in the first place in order to generate money to fund any projects that they want to pursue. For example, this can include national parks, this can include healthcare, this can include food stamps. And finally, it also includes giving money to museums. So if the government see that many famous museums, such as the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., are not able to get the funding they need anymore, they will have to get money, but this can only happen through taxes. The problem with higher taxes is that people will have to pay more, leaving them with less money in their pockets. What makes this matter worse is that richer citizens tend to visit museums more than their poorer counterparts, who have to instead focus on earning money for their families. This means we'd be taxing poorer citizens more in hopes that they would visit museums, only for them to still not be able to visit them because they're losing so much more money through these taxes. So by trying to make museums accessible to the public by making them free, we're making them less accessible because we're raising taxes as well. So now that we've discussed a variety of proposition points, let's go into the opposition side of the debate. Let's discuss why museums being free can potentially do more good than harm. So one contention that you can run on the opposition side is about how making museums free will get them more visitors. Because transportation costs and the usually large amount of time spent at museums, it can be extremely difficult to visit them. When it costs a certain amount of money to visit museums, or when museums aren't free, it causes a lot of potential visitors to face another barrier in addition to transportation costs. This is why if you removed admission fees and made museums free, you'd be removing one of the barriers or roadblocks to visiting, which means it would allow more people to visit, more people to enjoy the services that are provided by museums. This is a good thing because it will not only bring in more customers, but it also has more funding for museums. When the government recognizes that an institution such as the Natural History Museum is bringing in a lot of money for the government, it will fund these museums in order to make sure that they're bringing in more customers and providing everybody with the knowledge necessary. So with more funding, museums are able to grow and gain more exhibits to display items, including smaller museums that may not currently have government attention. But as they become free, it causes a lot of these smaller museums to get a lot more funding. Our second point that we're going to discuss on the opposition side is going to be regarding education. As we established in the last argument, when museums are made free, they will have more visitors. And if more people come to museums, then more people can learn from them. I can personally say that when I was in 4th grade, I visited a history museum that taught me a lot about World War I, allowing me to gain more knowledge in school. As you can see on this slide, Bertha Lee Strickland Cultural Museum states, a statistician found that children who visited a museum during kindergarten had higher achievement scores in reading, mathematics, and science than children who did not. What this means is that there's evidence of younger students become more proficient in subjects such as reading, math, and science after visiting museums. This point boils down to the impact of education as a result of museums becoming free. In addition to an increase in overall education, an increase in exposure to museums means that more people are also aware of the unique cultures that are around the world. Many museums display a lot of artifacts from a lot of different cultures, which allows for an increase in inclusivity as people are more aware of the world around them and are more open to new ideas. This leads to a decrease in hate crimes and discrimination due to an increase in inclusivity and makes the world a safer place with less violence and less hate ruling our lives. Now, here are another 2 questions I want everybody to try and answer. What is the impact of education? And what is the impact of developing proficiency in art, science, and history? Just like last time, pause the video for however long you need to try and answer these questions. Okay, now that you have your answers, let me give you mine. Education leads for people to lead better lives because education prepares you for the real world and your professional career. Second question, if you're able to have knowledge about art, science, and history, you'll know more about the cultural and ideas of the past, in addition to practicing applicable skills, aligned for a better understanding of the present with historical, artistic, and scientific wisdom. The more learning we gain about art, science, and history, the better decisions we can make in the present because we know more about the world that we live in. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments of this video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Just a reminder, Fremont Debate Academy does not support any particular sides. These are arguments that can help both sides debate. Hopefully, this does teach you about the importance of civic education and government policies early on, which is the reason that you should continue debating. In fact, FDU runs an entire civics program dedicated to this. Check them out on their website for more information. Thank you, everybody, for listening.